Okay, well, there we go. All right. And we begin now. Friends, welcome.
Vicky,
Oh,
you can mute everybody as a host. You can go on and mute everybody.
I am doing that. Thank you, except for the presenters. Thank you.
all right. So as we move everyone, just a reminder, if you missed a little pop-up, this webinar is being recorded. It's going to be posted later. So if you know anyone who's interested in this topic and missed the webinar, they can go ahead and watch it, but just wanted to inform everyone. So welcome to the Tiny Home Communities webinar. My name is Alaska. I am a tiny home dweller here in Washington. I've been living tiny for 2.5 years. It's wildly changed my life and all for the better. I am also the owner of a small business. The Tiny House Concierge is a consulting company that helps people go tiny safely. So if that's of interest to you, I'd love to chat later. Tonight's webinar is going to run for a couple hours. So feel free, if you need to step away for a moment, do so, but we are going to take a bathroom break at the end before we go into the breakout rooms. Before we get started today, I do want to take a moment for land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that we are on the homelands of the S'Klallam and Shimmikum. I also want to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors of today's event, Community Build, Housing Solutions Network, and the Real Estate Professionals for Affordable Housing. We could not do this without you. Tonight's webinar is going to cover tiny home communities and is going to give you some information about the recent changes to zoning that have been passed and give you next steps as to what you need to do if you have an interest in either creating a tiny home community or living in a tiny home community yourself. We're going to have a few different presentations, and then at the end, we're going to have some breakout rooms. And I'm not going to explain the breakout rooms. Like I said, I am not the technical expert here tonight. I am just emceeing. So I want to give Vicky a moment to tell us about that. And friends, Vicky is the organizer of Tiny Homes Jefferson County. That is tonight's host. Please join us in welcoming Vicky.
Thank you. So yes, so the presentation and the question and answer will run till about 8. At that point, we will have the opportunity for you to go into breakout rooms of your choice. And the idea is that several people have signed up to be hosts. All of the presenters will be in breakout rooms to answer your questions. So it'll be one-on-one time to connect or in small groups. There are some really interesting topics. One thing that people in Community Build are particularly interested in is what would it take to have a certified builder here in Jefferson County. So there will be the breakout rooms, and it'll be self-explanatory. I'll let you know when they're open, and a thing will pop up on your screen where you can choose the breakout room that you would like to be in. So that's how what the story is around the breakout rooms. Couple of other things is that if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. So the presenters will be doing their presentations, after which they will, if there's time before we move to the next presenter, there will be time for a couple of questions, but we left a bit of time at the end of all 3 presentations for you to answer questions. So you can use the chat, or you can raise your hand by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and the raise hand icon. So, and the other last thing is that we will be sending out the resources. We're going to put it together on a resource page. So we will be letting you know where the recordings are, and then we'll have a number of resources for you to refer to about all sorts of topics that we've covered in the 2 webinars. So if you would like to receive resources, please direct message me with your email. If you're already on our email list, you'll also be getting the resources. So no need to do that a second time. So I think that's it. And I'll turn it back over to you, Alaska.
All right. Well, thank you, Vicki. And we're going to just get going. So our first presentation tonight is about zoning requirements. And here to talk to us on that topic is Helena Smith. They are a long-range planner for the city of Port Townsend. They completed their master's thesis at Mills College on transitional housing here in Jefferson County. They've continued working toward accessible, sustainable housing as a local government employee. And outside of work, Helena enjoys reading, especially sci-fi, craft projects, and gardening. Helena, thank you for being here today. Take it away.
Thanks, Alaska. All right, let's see if I can share my screen. All right, great. Are you all able to see my presentation?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to be here to talk to you about 2 models for communities of tiny houses, cottage housing and tiny houses on wheel communities. So to get us started, I've got a couple definitions for us. First is cottage housing, which in Port Townsend refers to a small group of detached households with some specific design requirements that come from our municipal code, section 1734. If people want later during Q&A, I could definitely walk us through how to get to that section. I'm also going to be sending out my slides in the chat later with direct links to all of these places. Up next is what we're calling THOWs, which is short for Tiny House on Wheels. These are new in Port Townsend. We actually only passed our regulations allowing them this April, and people will be able to start applying to build or have one on July 1st. So coming up next week. I'm really glad we get to talk about them today. Tiny house on wheels is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a tiny house that has to remain on wheels. We've got some specific requirements for the design of individual tiny houses, as well as placing them in communities. The THOW communities refers to real property for placing 4 to 12 of them. And those are laid out with a binding site plan or unit lot subdivision so that each owner could actually buy the land under their THOW. So to get started, I'm going to talk to us in a little more detail about cottage housing. This has been in our code for longer than tiny houses on wheels, so I won't be covering it in quite as much detail, but I'm more than happy to answer questions about it. So to get started, cottage housing is allowed in 3 of our residential zones. That's R1, R2, and R3. Our density and minimum lot size are different depending on which zone you're in. So this is a table laying out, if you're looking at a property to try and make a cottage housing community, pay attention to the zone to figure out how many cottages you can place on it. This is a map of the city showing all of our residential zoning where you can place cottage housing communities. As you can see, it is most of the city, so there are quite a lot of options. I mentioned earlier that there are some specific requirements for cottages. So let's talk about what those look like from the outside in. So for their exterior, they need to be facing the street so that they're part of the surrounding community and don't feel isolated from their neighborhood. There are requirements for the yard, specifically having setbacks from the street and from the side yards. All of the buildings need to be at least 10 feet apart. That's mainly for fire and life safety. In terms of size, cottages are fairly small, even in tiny house terms. Their ground floor can't be more than 800 square feet. They are allowed to have a loft, but the loft can only be up to half the size of the ground floor. The maximum building height is 18 feet. There's also a requirement for open space. This includes a combination of common open space that's shared between everybody in the cottage community. You need 400 square feet per cottage, as well as private open space. That would be a private yard, and you need 200 square feet of that per cottage. No dimension of that can be less than 8 feet, and you can separate it off from the common open space using a hedge or picket fence. So this is the permitting process for cottage housing. You start with a pre-application conference where you would meet with our department at the City of Port Townsend to review the proposal, the site you're looking at, and figure out the best way to lay it out to get you what you want and comply with our code. And we'll also walk you through each stage of establishing the development. From there, you can choose 2 ways to subdivide the total property so that each cottage is on its own miniature lot, essentially. Your options for that are a binding site plan or a unit lot subdivision. Finally, once you've got the site plan or unit lot subdivision, you apply for a cottage housing development permit. This is a type 1A permit, so the final decision is made by
How many
our
square
department,
feet
PCD.
0.23 acres.
Sorry, what was that? Okay. So as part of that permit, their notice will appear in the local paper as well as at the site of the proposed community. So this should cover it for cottage housing. And again, I'll be more than happy to answer questions about this later during Q&A or in the chat after my presentation. All right, next we're moving on to tiny houses on wheels communities. So since these are quite new in Port Townsend, we've actually got some new sections on the website about them. When I send out these slides, you can directly click links that will take you to our FAQs about both individual THOWs, which can be permitted as accessory dwelling units or in a community. And all of those are going to be on the forms and documents section of our website. So for tiny houses on wheels, this is our flow chart for what kind of THOW you are interested in. So tiny houses on wheels are constructed off-site in a factory or other location. Unlike other tiny houses, they must remain on wheels. There are 2 options for design standards. The first one is park model built to ANSI 119.5. And the other option is building to the state building code standard. There's more information about that in our director's interpretation. A link to that is on the web page that I just showed you. When you apply to place a tiny home on wheels, you'll be showing us either a blue insignia for park model or a gold insignia for state building code. Either of those you're going to be getting from the Department of L&I. Whichever choice you go for, you will still be coming to us for, you'll still be going through labor and industries for permitting and then showing those permits to us when you apply for a plumbing permit and a site permit. And then again, here's a link to direct you right to the documents you need for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our standards for individual THOWs, but I don't want to spend too much time on this because we've got a lot of other great presentations tonight. First, the maximum ground floor area for these is 400 square feet. Again, pretty small. They are licensed and registered with the Department of Motor Vehicles because they are on wheels. The section of Port Townsend Code that specifies our construction certification standards is right here, 175830. And again, I'm more than happy to show people how to get to that from our website. They do need to be able to move on public highways, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about size. And the first floor can't be less than 150 square feet, and the height can't exceed 16 feet. So here's an example community layout. This lists a couple of our requirements for THOW communities to give you a sense of what sort of requirements and restrictions you should be thinking about. Community is 4 to 12 thous per lot, and this is an example of how they could be laid out on a 5,500 square foot lot zoned C2. I'm going to be showing you a map of where those are in just a minute. This gives us a little bit of a sense of the size range you can get for these, as well as the common space requirements. Unlike cottage housing, which requires 400 square feet per unit of common space, THOWs only require 200 square feet per open space. And the setback from all exterior lot lines is 10 feet. There is a 50-foot setback from primary arterial. In Port Townsend, that means Sims Way. So this just summarizes in a bit more detail what we were talking about on that last slide. The THOW communities do need to comply with the bulk dimensional and density requirements for the zone they're in. And there is a lot area per THOW. So while there isn't a minimum lot size for a THOW community, it does need to be large enough that however many THOWs you have, you need to have at least this much per each of them. So for their exterior, again, this is just going over in text format some of what we were looking at on that diagram. The minimum setback between structures here is 5 feet, unlike cottage housing's 10. One important thing to note is that all THOWs need to meet the tie down and skirting requirements of the applicable building codes. We're going to be talking about that more in just a minute, but I do want to highlight it because it is important. You know, it does get windy here, and it would be really awful if your THOW got moved around in a storm. So for placement, THOWs need to be within a community unless they're an ADU. The previous presentation that was hosted by Vicky talked more about ADUs. So for tonight, we're going to be talking about these pocket neighborhoods. At least half the units need to be directly next to the common open space.
How's it going?
All right. So these are some more rules for that central common space. One important thing to note is that setbacks don't count towards the common open space, neither do critical areas. However, you can count community buildings or clubhouses, so that gives you some fun options for ways to try and bring this community of residents together. There are requirements about maintenance. Even before approval is granted, we are going to need documents guaranteeing that that common space is going to be maintained, including any private roads or drives. That needs to be confirmed by an attorney and recorded with the county auditor. So in terms of where these communities are allowed, they're allowed in R3, C2, and C2S. The S just refers to a specific sub area that is around here. So these are all of the parcels in the city where these communities are allowed. The permitting process for THOW communities looks pretty similar to what we were looking at with cottage housing. You're going to be starting again with pre-application conference, and then moving on to either a binding site plan or unit lot subdivision. The last step is different because you'll be looking at a type 3 conditional use permit. With a conditional use permit, the final decision about whether the community is approved isn't made by our department, but by the Port Townsend hearing examiner. it's still going to be noticed in the local paper and people will be able to comment on it. I talked about tie downs earlier, and our department is actually requesting some feedback on this. These are the materials we've specifically discussed, and later during Q&A, if you have any points you'd like to make about which ones have been most useful to you, we'd really like to know. Because right now we're specifically thinking about steel strapping, cable, or chain. We are not requiring jacks, but we do recommend them. So we'd also like to know if you have experience using jacks on tiny houses on wheels, and if so, what's been most effective for you? All right. And I do also just want to show this slide to you. A lot of text, don't need to read it all now, but it's summarizing what we've been talking about so far in terms of the differences and similarities between cottage housing and THOW communities. So what zones are they allowed in? How big does the total lot need to be? What densities are allowed? And going into more detail about the requirements for the individual unit sizes. So thanks for bearing with me. I know that a few points got repetitive, but I really just want to make sure that we're all in the loop. Okay, and in terms of where to start, this is our link for scheduling a pre-application conference. This is where you can find all forms and documents for the City of Port Townsend's Planning and Community Development. And specifically from this documents page, you can click directly here in the yellow circle, or when I send out my slides, you can click from here to be taken to just the new documents for our tiny house on wheels. All right, I think that covers it. So I am more than happy to turn this over to our next presenter. Thank you so much for your time.
I think we have actually time for a question.
Oh, great.
And I just want also to highlight that there were changes made to the cottage zoning.
Yes.
They were the requirements, the design requirements were greatly simplified. And I think one of the big wins was that the type of permit was downgraded from a type 3, which requires public hearing and is more expensive, to a type 1. So this is part of the zoning changes that went through. And also another big one was the density was increased. So although it's not as great as the THOW density, it's a great increase. So on a standard lot, you can, in R2, you can have 3 cottages. So great wins. And I also just want to express my appreciation for your asking what kind of experiences we've had. And I really appreciate the planning department seeking out the experience of folks who've been through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for highlighting that big win, Vicky. I appreciate it.
So there was a question, Helena, is there a cost for a pre-application conference?
Yes, there is. It depends on the number of departments involved. With this, the planning department would certainly be involved. We might want to include the building department. Well, I know we would want to include the building department for the cottage housing because they'll be able to give you more specific feedbacks on the design requirements for each individual cottage. With tiny houses on wheels, we may not need to include building at that stage since you would be placing units that were manufactured elsewhere, but we would need to see that the tiny houses on wheels would be meeting our requirements. So yes, there is a cost for that.
Okay, Alaska, you want to introduce Todd?
Absolutely. Well, Helena, thank you so much for that presentation. That was great. I definitely going to go back later and rewatch this when I have some more time to click on all the links and explore further. We're going to keep this moving. So if you would please join me in welcoming our next presenter. Todd McKillips is a social entrepreneur, philanthropist, chaplain, and family man. He became an advocate for those in poverty after suffering a traumatic back injury with the Pierce County Police Department in 2005 and seeing homelessness firsthand. Todd is the director of the Washington Tiny Homes Association, and he opened Washington State's first tiny house community in Puyallup. Todd currently sits on the board of the Ortings Veterans Village and other advisory committees that support affordable housing. And we are so happy to have him here tonight to talk with all of us about tiny home communities. So please join me in soft clapping, silently clapping. Todd, take it away.
Thank you for having me. And I appreciate Vicky for putting this together, as well as the local groups there that are desperate for housing, and folks that are interested in partaking in this little venture. I don't have a fancy presentation. I do apologize. I actually was working on a tiny house and it ran a little bit late. I'm on Vashon Island. I'm on the ferry boat now, actually in my vehicle. So I kind of was there kind of a Q&A moment that we want to do with this, or do I know I'm speaking on tiny house community villages and what that looks like from a developer perspective. So I am a land developer. I run True Land Development, and we developed the tiny house community in Puyallup. We got lucky; it was a mobile home park already, so the zoning was really perfect for adapting to RVs standard and tiny house on wheel standards. So we went in already with a AOK from the county, 25 different meetings with them, spent some money, and I represent a management organization called Pacific Current Partners that wanted to develop and invest into this field. So we I believe that's the topic I'm supposed to talk on tonight. I just wanted to clarify. You can interrupt me, Vicky, if you wanted me to go on a different topic.
That sounds great, Todd. That's perfect.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, go ahead.
Especially think people would like to know things about costs, challenges, etc. Thank you.
Yeah. And so the challenge for most tiny home community development is always finances, and then the feedback and the pushback from local city or county. So what's exciting here about Port Townsend and Jefferson County and all that is the flexibility that the pursuit to adapt and make it more affordable is becoming a great thing for what you all are doing up there. Senate Bill 5383, running the Washington Tiny House Association and advocating and pushing the legislator to pass something. Finally, they passed the Senate Bill 5383, which was the Tiny House Community Bill. We had consulted and worked on that with Senator Zeiger at the time. And then 3 years later, we're sitting here doing this now, and it's pretty exciting. So, but in the meantime, other jurisdictions have been favorable, working in politics heavily to try to just get people to push and allow for things. We were able to develop the tiny house community there. Right now, for a developer to come in and do stuff from scratch, we've thrown around numbers, and it really just depends on what you're developing the community with, how many units you're going to have. We've been able to follow some gallon flow usage for RVs instead of houses. When you do development and you put in a septic tank or hook up to sewer, they're usually looking at how many gallon flow usage it is for a 1 bedroom, a 2 bedroom, all that. Well, a tiny home is kind of interesting, right? You got the loft space. It's more like a studio. There's no walls, no bedroom walls. A bedroom, technically by International Residential Code, has a closet space in it. So tiny homes don't qualify for that. Even if it sleeps 6 or 7 people, it's more of a studio. So therefore, we've been going to a lot of jurisdictions and showing them the schematics of RVs and how we actually adapt more into their code than we do anything else. So we try to file either a mobile home code or an RV code when it comes to development, and it's really up to the local jurisdiction to look at that. And what is nice for development cost is if they can look at it from an RV aspect, you can have 9 units hooked up to a bedroom tank, and it brought down the cost of development a lot for the Puyallup Park and for other parks that we've been doing. We've adapted to that. Not to say Port Townsend is going to do the same thing. I think they're going to look at everything as 1 or 2 units going on site and hooking up the sewer in the city. So it kind of eliminates the equation there. But 50 amp power pedestals, it's non-residential. It's actually considered temporary power. So your electrician can put it in and not have to go for further inspection normally. Not sure exactly on Port Townsend's, if they do electrical permits a little different. I know Puget Sound Energy and L&I have their way of doing things. So as far as overall cost of putting a pad in your backyard in Port Townsend, you're going to call a contractor. You're going to say, hey, I want this much gravel, this much for, for placement of that pad. I want to have water put in. I want to have the septic sewer put in, and I want to have electric put in. In my experience, on the low end, you could probably get something done for a few $1,000s working with a contractor for all of that. Then there's the permits from the city. So higher end, let's say you're pouring some asphalt, doing all of that, it could go a lot more. If you're trying to do a tiny home community, the cost goes up a lot more because you're going to clear land. You're going to do a lot of testing of that land to make sure it perks and different things. In my experience, on the lower end, it's about $40,000 per spot on development, which you're like at this point going, well, how is that affordable? In reality, that's where it comes to renting, the developer either renting the land, a nonprofit, acquiring the land, a nonprofit grant funding for all of that cost. And it's opportunity, believe it or not, for that, because you look at places in Seattle that, they're spending a few $100,000s before they break ground. So it's quite interesting. But so that's kind of the numbers out there. I just want to throw out there for the previous speaker talking about tie downs and all of that. I've done all of that. I deliver 2 to 3 tiny homes a month. I know it works, and I know it doesn't, as far as also developing the land and putting all of that in. I've done chains, I've done cables with tie downs. And again, the homes are kind of heavy. So depending on, most people are like 100 mile an hour winds, we're a little concerned with the home tipping over. It would take a massive gust to blow them over. But skirting and all that is great for pests. Also keeps warm, keeps your unit insulated a little bit better having skirting. I know Port Townsend's being really big on making sure hide some of the utility connections so they're prettier underneath the trailer and all that, and that's a pretty neat idea. I think they could be outside as well and do a planter box that covers it and stuff like that. I think that would be okay with the city of Port Townsend as you approach them. But as far as community development, there's a lot to it, a lot of political components and components you need to look at. As far as parking is one of the issues. In every development I've done, it's been a huge issue. I try to do one parking space and community parking spaces close by, but farther away. And I have people parking all over the grass and not following the rules. And so we've gone, okay, the customer wants 2 parking spaces per home. It makes sense. So if Port Townsend wants to do it right, I think looking at all of those scenarios where, how many people are going to be living there, how many cars are they going to have, you want to make it all comfortable for that, but you also want to make it beautiful, right? And that's something that Washington Tiny House Association is promoting. We're also trying not to let developers get too greedy with it. We think a perfect number, even per acre, is 12 to 15. We want people to know your neighbors. So I know Zach Giffen from Tiny House Nation is really big on promoting that as well. Let's get people that know each other's names in that community and grow it for the betterment of all. you have any other further questions, Vicky, that you think I should touch on?
Yeah, I actually might ask Helena to weigh in here. I think we're at one parking space per unit in a THOW community, and also the same for housing.
That sounds right, but let me double check our code real quick.
Okay, so she's looking it up in the code. Also,
No problem.
Todd, could you talk about the follow-up to Senate Bill 5383? And I put the link in the chat, but the follow-up being that tiny home communities are eligible for housing fund boards.
Yeah, House Bill 2001 was passed the legislature last year, and it basically allows for the federal there's federal money and state money out there that you can apply for, and basically like a grant you would get to eliminate some of the costs. Like, so let's say Port Townsend has a connection cost to hook up to sewer, permit costs, that business meeting that Helena spoke about. There is a way to get some of that back as far as credits. And so the legislator said, hey, let's allow tiny house communities, if it's for truly affordable housing, why not let them have access to some of that money? And so that passed overwhelmingly on the last legislative session last year. And then the bills that passed more recently this year, which kind of eliminates some of the single family residential zoning and all of that, is also helpful for the cause of tiny home communities and yards and all that. So I think Port Townsend knew it was coming. It feels like.
So I think we have time for a few more questions. If anybody has questions for Todd. Miriam, you want to unmute yourself? And
hi, Todd. Thank you for your good work. I simply didn't understand because there was a technical bandwidth issue when you were talking about the size septic system that was in a place per bedroom. I missed the numbers there. If you could share that again.
Yeah, so if you're following RV standards, see there's two standards, either bedroom standard that is related. Can you hear me okay? Okay, sorry, you disappeared on me. Yeah, so there's the bedroom standard and then the RV standard. And right now, the best, I can give you multiple numbers, but the best number is a normal 3-bedroom septic tank and drain field can hold up to 9 RV standard for the gallon flow usage. So I think the gallon tank is around a 1,200 gallon tank for the 3-bedroom size. And so it equals out to 9 RV standards. Now, some jurisdictions, I'm not saying Port Townsend and Jefferson County will follow that standard, but coming down from health, there's that's actually governed by Washington Department of Health as far as gallon flow usage for RVs. So as far as helping a developer, helping a low-income housing community, a nonprofit that's starting a community, if we can get your health departments to look at that, that would be very beneficial financially. And honestly, running a community for an extended amount of time, there's no issues with, I'm not having to pump that tank frequently or anything else like that. So I'm not cheating the system per se. It is just more of a studio apartment, and having multiple units, 3 to 5 even would be okay. But the 9 is a great number that the Department of Health mandated down to community development.
That was super helpful. Thank you. Very important.
No problem.
And Liz,
Yeah,
it looks like you have a question.
I have a couple of questions. One, in the communities, Todd, that you've helped develop, or where there's sewer, such as we have in Port Townsend, are utility costs shared? And hopefully there isn't a hookup for every unit at the very, very expensive price. And then also, how does one keep that I'd like to know that about the cottage communities too, which I know that you're not involved with, but if a group were to buy the land and rent spaces, what legal structure has been used to keep these permanently affordable?
There's many avenues for it, and it just depends on the developer. I mean, the people that we've been really knocking on doors for the last 10 years have a lot of money to spend. The tiny home village idea is great, and we've been trying to get nonprofits attracted to get in the environment, but a lot of them are like, no, it's so new. We are only going to go after things that are straight and the book is already written, right? So we've been kind of writing the book and creating the journey, legalizing tiny homes from scratch. It's been an uphill battle. We just this year got financing for tiny homes, where it's a mobile home loan, basically 25-year option. So somebody could get a payment from $500 to $700 a month for a smaller home, is huge. And they'll even do 500 FICO score and, zero down even sometimes. So accessing that is allowing us to kind of prove concept. Right now, all the developers that are getting into the game either own mobile home parks, RV parks. They know the system already. They're willing to kind of risk it and let me develop. I mean, literally, the one community I've been working for 2016 as a manager, and I've been just knocking on the door daily saying, this is something you need to do. So it's something you need to do. And finally, they took advantage and said, okay, we're scared to do it because you're the expert on it. But if you put us on speakerphone and go to the county, then we'll kind of look at things. If they give us permission verbally over the phone, then we're going to take a risk on it. We're going to try it out. And ultimately, $1,000 a month, in the Puyallup area. But the accessibility for a land trust to kind of go and, or a community group to go and start a land trust and do that is there. And then do a more lean development, maybe a $10,000 to $15,000 per lot development. Keeping it on sewer is going to be a lot more expensive than going septic. But that is just the nature of the beast with the fees. There is an impact to the sewer system, and the city sewers are not cheap. City maintenance is not cheap. So there's going to be a larger cost with that development. That being said, the community itself can create policies and procedures to keep it more affordable. As far as, looking at maintenance, looking at hiring a manager for the community and doing the land trust idea is probably the cheapest way to go. And, in realistic times, the water company charges my park $64 a month just to have a hookup. That's not even counting the water. So, let's see how long we're going to move. But yeah, we have utility costs that are increasingly higher. If you're providing people with internet, I've done the math. It's $200 to $300 a month, depending on where you're at in the county. And so you just got to be cognizant as you develop and as you develop your governing policies for nonprofit style community. It's going to go up every year. Inflation is happening, and the costs rise, and so you have to have yearly rental increases and stuff like that would cover those fees. Hopefully that makes sense. And I could go on a lot about this issue, but in reality, whoever is developing the community has the governing power over that. It doesn't take a rich developer to go and do this. Anybody can.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
Todd, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions before we move on? We got any in the here?
I'm concerned with Todd driving, so.
Oh, I'm not
Hopefully-
driving. He's my driver.
Okay.
I'm in the passenger seat.
If you can stick for the questions, we look forward to that. Okay.
All right. Well, Todd, that was great. Thank you so much. I am glad to know about you and the work that you're doing. That sounds very exciting. We're going to go ahead and keep this moving. Our next topic is going to be financing. Money is one of the major roadblocks that people run into when they're either trying to buy a tiny house or, of course, start a tiny home community. So tonight's presenter, we've got Terra Farrar. She started her personal tiny home journey in 2016. She had a builder, she had plans, she was all set to present Boomers Going Tiny at tiny house festivals. And then she ran into problems with tiny home parking. So fortunately, we're all here tonight because we're working together to solve that problem. She is here to share her firsthand experience. She also is conveniently a commercial loan agent with the Olympic View Group commercial loan team. They specialize in providing commercial loans, even in challenging times. We're very lucky to have her here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Terra.
Thank you, Alaska, and thank you everybody for being here. It's like exciting to see such an interest. You know, when I started back in 2016, it was like people are going, what are you talking about? But now to know it's like people are going, yeah, you're talking about it. So it's exciting for me to see such excitement and that it's truly a growing conversation. And people like Todd come along and you know, open up the pathway to make it easier and easier. And then we have beautiful communities like Port Townsend. When you're the first one in the state of Washington to take the leap and go, yes, we're going to make this possible. So I totally celebrate everybody for that. So Alaska, as you had mentioned, yeah, my journey got very frustrating. I was living on the big island of Hawaii. I sold everything. I moved back to the mainland, and then I got here and it's like, well, first of all, realizing I needed like a 350 pickup truck to pull the darn thing. And it's like, am I really going to take that on as a boomer? I'm not so sure I want to do that. And so then I was like looking for a place to park. And at that time, the conversation was, well, put your tiny home behind somebody's barn and hopefully nobody will know. And so it has really evolved in a short amount of time. And my passion now is really about creating financing for the communities and villages, et cetera. So I want to make it really clear that we are not doing residential loans. Todd has somebody, a company that he works with that'll do those loans. He mentioned a moment ago about some great opportunities there. Commercial loans are for, you know, like what we've been talking about, what Helena talked about, the communities and the villages. There's a lot of different terms, communities, villages, but it's pretty much all in one and the same idea. And I also want to clearly say, if you have a residential property and you live in the main house, whatever size that might be, and you're thinking, oh, I've got a big enough lot, I've got a big enough piece of land, I'll put 1 or 2 tiny homes on it and turn it into some rental property. And isn't that a commercial loan? No, unfortunately, it's not within the definition of commercial loans. It's really more of a private, personal, residential loan that you're going to use to build out and add a couple of maybe ADUs, alternative dwelling units, or tiny homes. So it's still going to go on to the residential property. So therefore, it's a residential loan. The only way around that is if your property could be then divided into 2 different plots. So you have your personal residential on one plot, and then you walk a few steps and you cross this imaginary line, and now you're in a different plot. Then you could put your tiny homes or ADUs on there, and that would be considered a commercial loan for that plot or that piece of land. So that's a big distinction. But you need to check with the city that you're in within Port Townsend. Go back to the city and see if that's even a possibility where you might be already living and considering about adding something. That's not my forte. That's where Helena would come in. That's where you would talk to her or someone on her team about that. So what we're looking at is possibly buying some land. And I'll use the analogy of a residential home because that's something more of us are familiar with. So if you have a piece of land and you're going to put a home on it, well, here in Washington, most of the time you have to clear out the trees. So there's the clearing of the land, and then there's putting in the roadway, and then bringing in the utilities. These are what, can be generally referred to as hard costs to get the property ready. So just like a home loan, you can get a loan to develop the land and have a different loan to build out your community, like purchasing and having the tiny homes built by Todd's company. And then, those tiny homes are brought to your property. So you have to have the funding to get those homes built and then transport them onto the land and get them hooked up so you can create the village or the community. Those are like two different loans, but a lot of the vendors that we work with, they have a department that handles land development, and then they have a different department that would handle the construction part. And a lot of times they can just transfer the completion of the land development over to the construction part. So you can still stay with the same lender. And just like with a residential home, you don't really start making loan payments on that development part until the property is ready and the living spaces are ready. It's, they're not going to give you $100,000 check and you put it in your pocket. It's put more like into a trust kind of a setting, where as you need funds to clear the trees, then that's made available. You need funds to put in the roadway, that's made available. Utilities are made available, et cetera, until that gets completed, and then you go into the second phase. You also, of course, can do the development where people bring in their own homes. There's just all kinds of ways to think about this. Are you going to maybe have 5 or 6 tiny homes, ADUs brought in, and those become Airbnb rentals? And the rest of it are people bringing in their own homes and renting a pad, renting a space. Got to go back to your city and talk to them about the piece of land you have or that you're considering buying, for them to tell you what's possible. Someone in your community, if you don't know him already, is with Windermere. And Andreas with Windermere, he sat on this council that was a part of all this. He understands the properties, where they're located, what they can and cannot do. He's got a great map. So you can always schedule an appointment with him and go look at the map and get in the car and go look at the properties and see what's possible. When I was in Port Townsend several weeks ago, which, by the way, I lived in Port Townsend for 5 years, and down by the marina area where you have that compass kind of built into the ground, where it's got a compass and there's different bricks in there with business names. I've got a brick in there from when I lived in Port Townsend. Then I moved away, and I was back there several weeks ago to just revisit your community, and had a chance to drive to some of the properties that were for sale that were zoned properly to do communities and villages. And there was quite a few in different locations of your beautiful county area. So Andreas is the one to talk to about that kind of thing. So I just wanted to say, really leave you with, get creative with your thinking. Of course, it's got to meet the zoning requirements. It's got to meet the city requirements, but there could be multiple ways to use that property. And there are loans out there. Some of the vendors we work with provide financing specifically for RV parks. Duh. Port Townsend has this wonderful definition that you now fit into that. And some of them provide funding specifically for senior housing. Well, then that's like a whole nother idea. Your community could be for boomers, people of 55 and older, could be part of that. Check with the city for zoning purposes. And then we have other vendors that are specifically about what they call multiple purposes. So it's what you need to do is have the clarity on how you would like to create your community or your village, how you would like to see that done. Do some preliminary, create that appointment that Helena talked about, do some preliminary research so you know what will fit within the city's guidelines, Port Townsend's guidelines. And then at that point, we can have a conversation. It really takes, anybody who's done business type things, entrepreneurial, you're familiar with the term executive summary. It's kind of like that. It's what is the purpose? What is the size of the land? How many units are going to go on it? How is your income coming in from that? And you can do some minor projections. Doesn't have to be this huge Excel spreadsheet, but they need to see that you know what you're talking about, that you've done the research. So it's going to cost so much a pad to get it developed. And this is the rent that we're going to ask for it, and do, maybe have some information. You could talk to Todd and find out, okay, you're successfully doing it in Puyallup. How long are the houses staying there? Is there much of a turnover? If you just have some of that preliminary information that you put in an Excel spreadsheet, like a 2 or 3 pager, and what kind of monies you're asking for, then I have something I can take to this group of loan companies that I work with. And I started having initial conversations. They pay me to bring you to the table, so it doesn't cost you to have me be on your team. And so I start knocking on doors and making phone calls and asking questions. And when they say, yeah, they'd have an interest, then I shoot them over that executive summary short page document and find out what their interest is. If they have questions, I come back to you and go, okay, they want more in-depth information on this or that, or they need this or that. And I become that bridge back and forth. And then when they have a strong interest, I make the connection, do the introduction, and then you all start talking that private conversation of show me the money. You start all really getting personal about that. So that's kind of the cycle of how it works. I have over 24 lenders that specifically work with RV type settings, senior housing, multiple family use, and we just have to find the right fit for you and with them. It's real important you set yourself up as an LLC or something like that. You don't want to go in as an individual that's doing this. One, you want to protect yourself, and this is a business, so set yourself up as a business. And I have introductions to an individual who specializes in creating LLCs. And because you live in Washington, it doesn't have to be done in Washington. It's other states, and he knows how to look for what is the best scenario for you and what you're doing. That's his forte. And I'll be happy to make that introduction. That was my whirlwind piece. Questions?
So, Terra, you mentioned LLCs, of course, and they can be very much set up as a share kind of business. But I'm also, Port Townsend is a do-it-yourself city. And a lot of people are interested in co-buying land. So would vendors talk to cooperatives? Todd mentioned, for example, that cooperatives are an inexpensive way to go. I mean, or a less expensive way to go. So would they be willing to lend to cooperatives?
You know, I haven't approached them about a cooperative term. Todd, can you unmute yourself and jump in with me here for a minute?
Yeah.
Because you and I have had conversations about it's important to be set up as an LLC. And what has your experience been with some of this?
You know, most cooperatives are nonprofits with governing documents. The same thing as an LLC or a limited liability partnership. My farm is under a limited liability partnership, and we're kind of doing it as a cooperative basis. So I think whatever you're registered as with the state, as long as it's a business, and then your lenders are looking at, you know, like you told me, experience and all of that. So as long as you have a board member that has those kind of business experience and the land developer experience. So, you know, I think the best way to do land trusts in the cooperative model is to make sure you have high level of experience board members. And then so applying with those board members for financing is an opportunity, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. And you know, Todd brings up a reminder, and a very valuable point here is lenders are looking at this as how much of a risk are you going to be? So if you are like a nonprofit or co-op, as long as there's people on your team that can come in with some strong background in business. Sometimes individuals are retired high corporate end people. You may even have a lawyer friend who's on the team. Just think of it in terms of your lender is a business and they're looking at you as a business when we're talking about commercial loans, when we're talking about communities, et cetera. Totally different than being a resident who's looking for a residential loan. Totally different. Did that answer that for you, Vicki?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, did we have any more questions while we're in this stage? We're going to do breakout rooms in a little bit, but does anybody have any questions for Terra right now before we move on?
Miriam does.
Yes, could you provide your contact information directly in the chat?
Yeah, I will definitely put that in the chat. No problem.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to open it to any questions for any of our presenters, and we may move a little bit early into breakout rooms.
Okay, that sounds good, Vicki. Everyone, thank you so much for being here and being part of the Tiny Home Communities webinar this evening. Presenters, you were wonderful. Yes, thank you for that great information. Finally, thank you to our co-sponsors of tonight. One more time, that was Housing Solutions Network and sorry, I'm getting nervous at the end. Why is that happening right now? Housing Solutions Network, Community Build, and Real Estate Professionals for Affordable Housing. We appreciate you so much. If you're not a member of the Tiny Homes Jefferson County group and you would like to be, definitely touch base with Vicki and get hooked up with that mailing list so you don't miss our webinar events, community events. And I think that's it. Thank you so much, and let's go to those breakout rooms.
I have a few announcements before we go. And I saw Helena, you raised your hand. Do you have a question?
No,
Nope.
I think that was actually clapping in response to
Oh,
Tara's great
okay.
presentation.
It's a great presentation. So two things is our next Tiny Homes Jefferson County meeting will be on Tuesday, July 18th in a couple of weeks at 4 p.m. And I will be sending that information along with the resources links for everyone. So, but I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And so we're here to be an advocacy group. There's still work to do, especially looking in the county to see if we can get some of these changes about definitions for tiny homes relative to septic fields. That would be a good one to work on. We have a lot of work that we're still doing on the tiny shelter ordinances. So if you're passionate about using tiny shelters for the unhoused, please join us in that work. And also, we're just here to be an exchange. So if you have an ask or an offer in terms of resources, we each time at our meetings have an opportunity to go into that as well. So please join us at Tiny Homes JC meetings. But the other big announcement that I would like to make is that one of the topics that did not come up tonight, but we talked about in the first webinar quite a bit, was what it would take to do certifying to manufacture tiny homes on wheels in Jefferson County. And we're going to have a specific breakout group for that. But also there's this excellent opportunity that is coming up on this Saturday, July the 1st. And Todd is going to be doing a meetup, a tour of his manufacturing facility, Washington Tiny Homes, Seattle Tiny Homes. And that is in Buckley. And I will be going. So there is an opportunity if you are interested to go see a manufacturing facility. And Todd also has a little tiny hotel arrangement out there as well. So that'll be part of the tour too, I believe. So I'm going to put the information on how to sign up for this in the chat. But I think it's an excellent opportunity to get a very hands-on feel for what it takes to be a builder of tiny homes on wheels. So I'm very excited about that. I'm gonna get that information in the chat in a minute. And here it goes. Okay, so yay. So here I'm going to now introduce the breakout rooms. As I explained before, there's a chance to ask questions of the presenters or to make connections. And what I'm going to do is to open it up and give people about 5 minutes to join up, because if you wanted to take a bio break right now, that would be great. And I will give you a preview, and anybody else can also weigh in here, is that the breakout rooms for this evening include Helena is going to be answering code questions in room 1. We are going to have Terra answering more financing questions in room 2. Judy Alexander and Todd McKillips are going to be in a breakout room about certifying THOW production. Room 4, I do not believe the host has joined us tonight, but she wanted to talk about communities for people of a global majority. BIPOC.
I'm actually here.
Oh, hi, Oceana. So she is here. So please, she's going to do that. And then there's also room 5, anybody who's interested in purchasing land and starting a tiny home community. So would any of you hosts of the breakout rooms like to add information on what you're going to be talking about in the breakout rooms?
I get,
Okay.
Vicky, I
Yep.
guess I would. A while ago, you mentioned when we were first talking between you and I about there being a facility that we
Mhm.
get certified to be doing the needed certification to create these buildings with community builds efforts. You mentioned that it might be of interest to people who are doing do-it-yourself projects as well, that they would use the same facility. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to put that out there before we get into the breakout rooms, because I don't know what everybody's entry point is for why they're in this webinar, but I know there are some people from Community Build in this dialogue, and Todd is going to be there, but I just wanted to be inclusive of anyone who might be
Mhm.
a do-it-yourself person that's interested in having a facility place to build something that could be then moved. Is that a legitimate?
It
add-
is. And
added-
we also recognize that there are a lot of hoops to jump through for certification. And we're
Right.
trying to create pathways for everybody who has the potential to build tiny homes, be it you a do-it-yourselfer versus, community organizations such as Community Build. So may not be possible now, but let's figure out what the roadblocks are and start to address them.
Okay.
So again, one last comment is I will be staying in the main room and I will be talking about what Tiny Homes JC can do to help anybody who wants to do something with tiny homes, and look forward to seeing you all in the end. And thank you again for coming tonight. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms. And then you can, let's see here. Where's the room?
Vicky, which room is the
I'm
certification?
gonna just make sure that why I'm not sure. I thought say breakout rooms. Okay, I had breakout rooms too. I might have to recreate them. So give me 5 minutes and I'll just.
Would you like me to tell a tiny house story? Is this do you
Yes,
need a
please do that.
buffer? Okay. All right, friends. Well, I'm going to tell you a quick tiny house story. So this is the story of my first week living tiny. So I purchased my tiny home used. I bought it 2.5 years ago. It was in Austin, Texas. And I was very excited. The former owners sold it to me furnished. So they sold it, everything in it. They were ready to move on to van life. They actually downsized. They just left the house as is and I took over. So my first week I drove to Austin, Texas. I was in Kansas at the time. And first couple days I'm, cleaning out everything, getting everything cute. And all of a sudden I get a panicked phone call from my sister who's screaming, "Do you have propane? Do you have propane?" And I'm like, I don't know. And she says, "There's a blizzard coming for Texas." And I'm like, "A blizzard? That doesn't happen in Texas. What are you talking about?" I get on my phone. She's right. I need to get propane immediately. Run to the store, get propane, hook on a new tank, and the snow starts to fall. By morning, I cannot get out of my tiny house. I am physically trapped in my tiny house. The roads are not plowed. My car can't go anywhere, even if I were to dig myself out. I realize in that moment that my water is frozen. I don't have access to water. I forgot to get groceries. I was just so panicked about propane. And I didn't get dog food. I should mention at this point that I was puppy sitting 2 Chihuahuas. I ended up spending the next 4 days living on the former owner's frozen food that they left in the freezer. I was melting snow to clean my tiny house. I had power that was intermittent, and that's how I learned the blessing that is a combo of propane and electricity. My stove was propane, but my heat was electricity. So even though I didn't have heat the whole time, I was able to make hot water bottles, hot food, and just stay relatively warm during this fiasco. It turned out that a mainline water pipe burst in the city of Austin that winter. And so I actually went without running water for 17 days. 17 days is when I gave up. I remember that when you don't have water, the toilet doesn't work. So I tough out the situation, borrowing my Chihuahua's special mats for 17 days. And after that, I said, okay, all right, I'm tough. I'm a tiny houser, but that is officially my limit. And I went to go live in Tennessee with my family. So all this to say that tiny living sometimes has challenges, but I hope that these new laws will make the pathway a little smoother.
Okay, I'm ready to open those rooms, and thank you again for coming. You're welcome to come back to the main room to say goodbye, but you can also just leave on. Thank you. Okay. And can you see the choice? You have to go to the bottom and join through the click breakout rooms and choose.
Please describe which each one is unless it's listed there, Vicky.
So again, Helena with code questions, Share with financing. Can you see those when you?
No, I don't see them yet.
No,
I don't see them yet either.
Okay, let me try this. No, that's not. This is very strange. There should be 5 rooms and there's worked last time.
I have more tiny house stories if you need another.
No, I want to.
We could start a TV show, I think, with all our stories if people touch tiny homes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a YouTube series, Tiny
Oh,
House.
yeah.
It
I'll have to find it.
says that there, I'm not sure. I apologize for this. I thought they had all been set up and don't know how to do that tonight.
Should we just do people can ask questions and just direct it to a specific person?
I think that's what we'll do. And but I will complete the recording now. Thank you.